Work. Okay, thanks Teresa and for a nice and inspiring talk. And also for the last slide, which was fun. My title was maybe inspired by that, and some things I would like to add to your presentation will be in the same spirit. I wanted to say that what I'm going to present here is not something like a criticism or something of your paper. Instead, I just wanted to, what I think, emphasize what I said here. Before and after reading your slides, which you sent me. The importance of the idea of the DeNobis concept, and have some takes on the issue, which I hope, indeed emphasize more strongly the importance of the concept and the need of an analysis, like, okay, in the way you carry that out. And so I have a few issues and observations there, I think, which will be 3 takes. Now, while listening, I noticed that I do have maybe some criticism, but I hope that they can only be productive and constructive. But okay, so we will see. So first, the first take is a linguistic take on the issue. So as you pointed out, so there is a lot of discussion in the literature about this notion of collective intentionality, a broad term covering like joint responsibility, joint actions, group activities involving intentionality. So a huge term and a lot of discussion about how to analyze that and whether or not it can be analyzed to the individual case. The linguistic take on the issue is that this involves something like a group predication, and whatever the outcome of this debate will be, and okay, so I put Gilbert there because I think I very much sympathize with the way she puts the matters every now and then. But no matter how you want to analyze what's going on in this plural predication, there is, okay, so here is for instance an example which I think, so here I disagree. I wouldn't count this as something like metaphorical, statements like these. The Romans wanted to rule the world. That can be true, it can be intended just to say what they wanted to do, and their joint behavior did have the effect and showed, I think, the intention of them as a group to wanting to do that, so, something of the kind. But maybe, so that's not the first issue. The idea is that instead of collective predications, and this is really an observation from the linguistic and the logical literature, so I've put Remco Scha here, but I could also add Keenan. So there's not just plural predication, but we express relations between plural individuals, subjects and objects. So and then you might say, well, there could also be relational intentionality in the plural. And so the findings of Scha and Keenan is that they point out that a lot of these statements, just also non-intentional ones involving group subjects and group objects, cannot be reduced to separate analysis of the subject and the object, right? And so that there's this point about you cannot reduce, for instance, a couple of sentences in the Freudian vocabulary using these unary quantifiers. And so out of the blue you might say, if we can find something relational, intentional at the plural level, then maybe whatever account you have of the collective predication at the subject-predicate level, maybe it's going to be, again, ask for complication at the relational level. So I don't know if this is a very good example, but you might say the Greek inspired or educated the Romans. And you can say that this is or can be a very true statement. Where we have the Greeks, not having this separate collective activity, and the Romans being told by the Greeks, but there is some kind of thing which is going on and which I think can be fairly well described as this sentence says, that where we have this relation, an intentional relation involving two plural entities. And so, okay, it's a very open question, but solving the subject-predicate case may be not sufficient for solving the relational case. And then the things start getting interesting, and that's where today's talk gets interesting, because if we have got these intentional relational attitudes, they can be reflexive, of course, and then really the question is whether whatever analysis we have of these relations will also apply in the reflexive case. So having reflexive intentionality in the plural, and I think this kind of statement, which could occur to anybody at some point in his life, anybody maybe in plurals, is that if you say something like, well, we have been deceiving ourselves, right? That happens. And I will come back to this issue, but this is really a core kind of thing that may happen in life and which happens in all of our communities, that people are deceiving themselves, right? And they might say we have been doing so, maybe even correctly described as willfully deceiving. So that looks very much intentional and very much plural and very much DeNobis. And then there's another example which may add as a parallel. I don't know if the example is, I think it's not really perfect, but I think it's fun. So if you look at the sentence, the Dutch are tolerant, and add to that, that's something like that the Dutch believe it. So the example will not really be perfect. There's a lot to be added about it, but I will say 4 things about it. So first, is that the statement is true. A lot of people agree about that, and also Dutch and the people I talk to say, yeah, okay, the Dutch, yes, they are tolerant, indeed. But if you ask the Dutch, like among ourselves, and that's the people I talk to, and they say we are tolerant, and they will say, well, no, and I would say no, also. Said by the Dutchman about ourselves, because we know what is this thing that makes us tolerant and makes us be rightfully described as tolerant is something that is the result of a joint activity, and I'm honest about it, which is that of a purely rational and calculated profitable behavior, right? That's it. We are tradesmen, seafaring nation and stuff like that. If you read the history books saying that, that we are tolerant, the answer is no, we are not, right? We know ourselves. Then if you ask me, I would say, yes, but I am tolerant, right? And I think every Dutchman would say so. But then again, if you ask me, so are the Dutch, all of them, tolerant? I would say no again. And all the other Dutch would also say no. They say, yes, I'm tolerant, but the other ones are not. Okay, this may be a caricature, but if you can follow this line of thought, then what we find here are cases of, well, we the Dutch believing about the Dutch, they are tolerant, that in the DeNobis case counts as true, the DeNobis as false, the they say as true, and the de as false again. So we've got a fair distinction where the DeNobis and the they say parallel, a distinction on the DeNobis and the de level. Like I said, there's a lot to be said there, but because you might say, we involve different notions of tolerance here, and that could be a good argument, even though I tend to the idea that maybe it's all the time the same kind of notion of tolerance being involved here, but that it's the way it's predicated and used in these 4 types of attributions, DeNobis, DeNobis, they say, and de re, which is different. Now there is another, so that was the first, and there's one parallel you might add to the issue. Now, philosophical take, so I believe myself that there's, well, following Lewis, that all belief essentially is self-locating belief. For a few of you that doesn't sound new, but I think that's really very true, and it's self-locating if you want in logical space, in physical space, if you want in phenomenological space, but I think all belief is basically self-locating. There's an other point also in philosophy, so and as an attitude towards sceptical demons, you might say, and sceptical arguments and all that stuff people have been fighting against, I think the most fair position or attitude to adopt is that of what I'm just coined, or I don't know how to say, but it's like common sense externalism. It's just common sense of about having this external world around us, and you know that's what we build on and start off from. And this is not enough to silence the skeptic, of course, because he will never be silent. But that's the kind of attitude which I think makes you feel comfortable about how to look at truth, knowledge, and all that stuff. So I think that these are good points, having self-locating beliefs and a notion of common sense externalism. But if you let it dawn on you, what these two views on matters imply is that there is something like this joint belief in a common world. It's really a joint belief in a common world, which you might say follows from these first two positions. I've labeled Wittgenstein here. I think it holds for both the early and the late Wittgenstein. I've amended one of his quotes. How much time do I have that I could read it? Okay, I pass over these quotes, but so what I think what it boils down to is that here is some statement which I think is really true, that we believe we live in the world we inhabit. And about this statement, I would say that this is a genuinely, they say, kind of statement. I don't think reading it otherwise would be misreading it. I also think it's that, following from the previous points, is that it's essentially plural. So it's not about me, but about us, and it's about us believing, us living in the world. And I also think that the kind of truth it expresses is one which is not necessary in whatever sense, but it's also not accidentally true, but it's somehow unnegotiably true. So that kind of statement, I would say, is a perfect statement of something which, so if it's genuinely, they say, and essentially plural, which may answer your first doubt, Teresa, I think that here we have a real DeNobis kind of truth, I would claim. Then from the same perspective, you might think, okay, so if there is something to this maybe irreducible kind of DeNobis thought, and there's this indeterminacy about what are the groups we are in, we can draw another parallel and then think of, well, okay, so maybe, so you did draw a distinction, and maybe, so I would, I have kind of different opinions maybe from you, but that the individual is not like a point or a given thing, or I don't know how to see it as what, and maybe conceive of the individual or the self as something as a corporate body, right? It's also something, it's not just an determinate given thing. And so what are the kinds of things? So at first, as for our perception, so it may be the physicist, and this is an old moral, he may point out that you see the stick in the water and you see a bent stick, and the physicist points out, but you know, it's straight, right? Or you take it out of the water and you see it straight. But what you see all the time, you see it bent. And maybe it's a kind of fishermen who are able to see it straight, but I guess all of you, if you look at the stick in the water, you see it bent, then that's it. But you know, and the physicist points out, so what you see is not what you get, it's straight. So this holds for perception, but also for something like inner perception. So I'm old enough to have been to a doctor once, and the doctor can, you know, he did point out to me that the pain I feel here is actually there. You know, and I believe him, right? But still I feel it here, but he can tell me it's there. So he knows better about my own pains. And even about our intentions. So I'm not old enough to have been at a psychiatrist, but I know of people that your psychiatrist can point out to you that, like, what you think is that this goal which you're having, I don't know, becoming full professor or doing this or doing that, but really, you know, and everything in you and in your body and in your life is not going after that goal, but that's your goal. And that's somebody who knows, in a sense, more about your intentions. And so what I want to say with these examples is that we can be as mistaken about ourselves as we can about ourselves in the plural. So the fact that there is indeterminacy about ourselves in the plural, you know, doesn't make it different from the knowledge we have about ourselves in the singular, because that's also, in a sense, indeterminate. So that was critical, but it's positive in a sense. That's another parallel, I would say. Then there is a personal take on the issue in the end. So I think the truth is negotiable in general, and somehow, so the way Peter put his comments yesterday, that was also like, you can see that's going on in discussions. So there's a trade-off by saying, well, if we distinguish these cases, you get truth for internalism here and externalism falls there and stuff like that. So it's something we deal with. It's negotiable, and I think it's kind of a fact of life. But if you couple that with the ideas about how, I think in the line of Davidson and Birch, added with the ideas of Lewis and John Perry here, to what it is that we all believe in and what we, well, not found our knowledge in, but what we take for granted, it is that, as a matter of fact, that the common knowledge we have, it is, as a matter of fact, indistinguishable from collective delusion, right? We don't know. Because what you might say is going on there in this kind of activities is that both something like common knowledge and these shared assumptions are just both a joint activity of maintaining common belief. So in the plural again, and a common joint belief in some kind of an external reality, but it is that kind of activity which keeps us going, but which you might say, well, okay, so far it consists of common knowledge, but as a matter of fact, if you step out, it may consist of something like collective delusion. So here is where maybe again the skeptic might stand up, even though he might also not have much to say, but it's a point I think could be important. And the idea that common knowledge can count as something like a collective delusion, so it's not just, you know, and you can see it around, right? And if you look at the history of, to stop. So that just for one example, so I'm myself a proponent of like model theoretic semantics. I believe it's a good thing to do and it's very productive to do. And that's something you do in a joint activity where you are quantifying over meanings and you refer to meanings and all that stuff, even though surely by the end of the day I totally agree that meanings and propositions and contents and thoughts, I really think, you know, they are not there. There's no such thing as meanings, propositions, whatever, all that stuff. So when it comes to the point, and so maybe in the evening, but all the time, there is really no such thing. Even though within the bubble of doing model theoretic semantics, it's a fair assumption to make and it works well. And so that would be my activity. Everybody has got his own ism or favorite thing that he believes in and works on, and I think that's one of those things where you might say, well, that's something that constitutes in a group some kind of common knowledge, which you may count as collective delusion, and which you may be happy with, I think, if you conceive it this way. And then I have my version of your final slide.